Hello, my name is George Cahan, and welcome to our first episode of Music Notes. This is the series in which we review music and the artists that created them, purely from my point of view. Today's episode is going to start off with the giant of all giants, the Beatles, my all-time favorite group, and I wanted to do a worst to best list. And I know it's strange to associate the Beatles with the word worst. It doesn't mean that I don't adore the music. It's just the least favorite collection of their songs, in my opinion. Okay, let's get going. First album, the worst, at number 14 is Please Please Me, which is 1963 and turns out to be the Beatles' first album that they ever put out. This is a little quick shot of it here. Highlights, however, include I Saw Her Standing There and Twist and Shout, There's a Place, Do You Want to Know a Secret, and of course Love Me Do. The other songs that make up part of this collection, just not among my favorite ones, A Taste of Honey and Misery, and some of their cover songs like Anna and Chains. It didn't really do it for me. I know music is very subjective, but as it turns out, this album probably has my least favorite collection of Beatles songs. Okay, moving on. Number 13, Beatles for Sale. This was their album that came out in 1964. Again, it's very early Beatles. They were allowed to do a little bit more of their own songs, which makes this album slightly better. And again, it's not that I don't love the Beatles. Some of the lowlights of the album are songs like Mr. Moonlight, probably one of my all-time least favorite Beatles songs. Honey Don't, What You're Doing, another cover. But there's some highlights on it too. Their cover of Buddy Holly's Words of Love is definitely one of my favorite songs. I also love I'll Follow the Sun. So this album overall is heading in the right direction. There's a lot of great musicianship. The Beatles are well on the way to creating some classics. It's the reason why it's at number 13. Coming in at number 12 is the 1963 album With the Beatles. In America, the equivalent was Meet the Beatles, although it had some slightly different listings in the songs. The highlights Won't Be Long, All I've Got to Do, All My Loving, Don't Bother Me, Roll of Beethoven, although it was a cover, was an excellent song. I Want to Be Your Man was a lot of fun. You Really Got a Hold on Me was very memorable. Some lowlights, their cover of Please Mr. Postman didn't really do it for me. Devil in a Heart, Not a Second Time, Money. You might notice a pattern that a lot of these songs on the worst side of the list are the early Beatles. That's not a coincidence. My favorite Beatles albums are from their later period of time when I felt their identity is in full swing. Okay, let's move on. Coming in at number 11 is the soundtrack to their film Help. This was 1965, and it was released as a separate album. You got the title track Help, The Night Before, You Gotta Hide Your Love Away, You're Gonna Lose That Girl, Ticket to Ride, love it. You Like Me Too Much, I've Just Seen a Face, and of course Yesterday, definitely super highlights for me. Some of the lowlights, again, it's not really terrible because I actually do like the songs, but Dizzy Miss Lizzy is okay. It's a little bit noisy for me. Another Girl, it's okay. Tell Me What You See, again, not a terrible song, just not high on my list. But again, the Beatles are climbing the way to being the iconic artists for me at this point. Okay, we've arrived at the point on our list where the remaining Beatle albums are all great. I love them, and I know in general they're all regarded as masterpieces in their own right. Starting at number 10 is Rubber Soul, 1965. I know maybe a few people will be surprised that it's not higher on the list, but again, I'm just giving you my honest and personal opinion. Highlights include Drive My Car, You Won't See Me, Nowhere Man, one of my all-time favorites, The Word, I'm Looking Through You, In My Life, If I Needed Someone. Love those songs. Actually, I do love the entire album. Some of the lowlights for me were, and this might shock some people, I'm not a huge fan of Norwegian Wood or Michelle. Run for Your Life, it's okay. Again, when I say this, it's not that I don't love the songs, they're just not among my favorites. So this is Rubber Soul coming in at number 10. At number 9, this might surprise a few people, Hard Day's Night, 1964. The reason why this album is so high on my list is it's just a wonderful collection of songs. The Beatles wrote songs specifically for the movie, and they borrowed other songs from some of their other albums to complete the soundtrack. Highlights include the title track, A Hard Day's Night, and it also has one of my all-time favorite songs, I Should Have Known Better. I just adore that song. It has always remained one of my all-time favorite Beatles songs. Can't Buy Me Love, Anytime at All, Things We Said Today. Just amazing, amazing songs. Okay, moving on. This might surprise some people. Number 8, coming in, 1970s Hey Jude album. This was actually a time when the Beatles put out an album to fulfill a contractual obligation and to give the illusion that they were still together, when in fact they had already split up at this point. But this album is important because it actually collected some of the singles that can't be found on any other album, including highlights. Hey Jude, can you imagine not being able to have that song on any album? Revolution, the fast version of it. Old Brown Shoe, The Ballad of John and Yoko. Paperback Writer, I Should Have Known Better is on this. Lady Madonna, which can't be found anywhere else. Can't Buy Me Love. It's a weird mixture of time periods, so it's a little bit of a mixed bag. But the importance of this album and how many times I've listened to it puts it at this level on the list. Okay, moving on. We have at number 7, Yellow Submarine. And this is the 2012 version of it. The original version came out, I believe, in 1967, and it only had 6 Beatles songs on it. The rest of the album was filled out with George Martin's orchestral score on the film. It's an excellent album in its own right, but it's clearly a soundtrack album. This is an improvement because it's just the Beatles singing. And we got 15 tracks. Highlights, of course, the title track, Yellow Submarine. Harrison's It's All Too Much, one of my all-time personal favorites. All Together Now, which I love. So this is a really wonderful album, and that's why it's this high on my list. Collectively, it's one of my favorite Beatle albums, although it wasn't released in the original collection of albums. Highly recommend it. They're a wonderful grouping of their songs. Okay, now coming in at number 6, and some people might be surprised why it's not a little bit higher, but it's 1966's Revolver. I just want to say flat out, this is a masterpiece of an album. I love it. But highlights include Taxman, Eleanor Rigby, I'm Only Sleeping, She Said, Good Day Sunshine. I mean, literally every song in this album is a highlight. I really don't have any songs here that I would call a low light. Revolver was a game changer for the Beatles, and rightfully so. It's timeless. Revolver is a Beatles masterpiece. Okay, getting into the top 5 Beatle albums. This was very difficult, I have to tell you. Anya, my daughter, was a little bit shocked by my selection, and I didn't disagree with what she thought were the top 5. But keep in mind, this is just my own personal favorites, okay? Coming in at number 5, 1968's double album, The Beatles, of course, affectionately called The White Album. Do I love this album? Of course I do. It is ambitious. It's a double album. There's 30 songs on it. It's incredible. The diverse amount of songs is amazing. What keeps it from being number 1 for me is a couple of lowlights. And again, when I say that, it's not that I don't appreciate the Beatles, but John Lennon's Revolution number 9 really should have been left off the album. It kills the momentum. It's extremely strange. It should have belonged almost as a solo piece for John, or maybe on a separate album where they could have done more experimental songs. Wild Honey Pie was another kind of throwaway song. Having said that, you got incredible amount of highlights. Almost every other song, Rocky Raccoon, Back in the USSR, Dear Prudence, Obla Di Obla Da, Glass Onion. I could go on and on. Even Ringo's closing song, Good Night. I love it all. It's great. It's an emotional roller coaster. The songs are incredibly different from each other. And the White Album is a masterpiece. Totally agree. Okay, let's go on. Coming at number 4, 1970s, Let It Be. I know, ironically enough, people consider this the Beatles' swan song, The reality was they actually recorded it before Abbey Road, but the album did come out last as an official Beatles product. I love this album. I love it so much that I could have made it my #1 album. The idea behind the film was to show the Beatles creating the songs, doing very simple, stripped down versions of these songs, and then performing them in concert. Sort of a soup to nuts approach to making an album. Also, it was a chance for the Beatles to get back to their early roots of just simply being in a room and creating great music. Highlights, again, some of my all-time favorite Beatles songs are here. A lot of them are Paul McCartney's. He really was on a roll at this period of time. But you got Two of Us, The Long and Winding Road, you got Get Back, you got Let It Be, the title track. John was having a tough time creatively, but even having said that, Across the Universe, Dig a Pony, One After 909, one of the earliest songs that they ever wrote. Just a masterpiece of an album. I love Let It Be, I adore it, but the albums that remain are slightly better. Moving on to #3, this might shock some people. It's the Magical Mystery Tour from 1967. I know this album is a mixed bag for a lot of people, but I have to tell you, I listen to this album all the time. The collection of songs are amazing. Yes, it is the soundtrack to the TV movie. How can you knock anything that has Your Mother Should Know, I Am the Walrus, the absolutely amazing Hello Goodbye, Strawberry Fields Forever? If those were the only songs on the album, it would qualify to have the album as high on my list as possible. And of course, you got All You Need Is Love, the closing track. Magical Mystery Tour is indeed magical. I love it. The Beatles, once again, even though they were having some personal issues at this point, were still able to produce timeless, wonderful music. I love this album, and to me, it deserves to be this high on the list. I think you can probably guess where we're going for the remaining 2 albums. Coming in at #2, 1967's Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. This album has rightfully been loved since it came out. It is a masterpiece of innovation, and the collection of songs are fabulous. There is debate whether this is a true concept album, but I just think that no matter how you view it, whether you think of it as one piece of work, telling a story, or a collection of individual songs, this album has a little bit of something for everyone. I absolutely love it. Highlights, the title track, Sgt. Pepper's, Little Help from My Friends, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. I mean, I could read the entire list of the song. When I'm 64, Lovely Rita. It's a great, fantastic album and deserves to be this high on the list. And coming in at #1, I'm sure you know where I'm going with this, 1969's Abbey Road. The real true swan song of the Beatles, and what a way to go out. There was some debate among the Beatles about how the album was created, but they did band together and work together to create this incredible collection of songs. The debate came mostly from John Lennon, who was skeptical when Paul McCartney and George Martin took pieces of 20-something songs that they had and figured out a way to stitch them together to make these beautiful sonic suites, these collection of songs that make up side 2. And you know what? The experiment really worked. Come Together, Something, George Harrison's masterpiece, Octopus's Garden, Here Comes the Sun, You Never Give Me Your Money. I mean, fabulous, fabulous songs. Golden Slumbers, Carry the Weight, The End, and then to leave it with the quirky Her Majesty. How perfect. Only the Beatles could get away with doing something like that. I've listened to this album hundreds of times. Every time I put it on, it's fresh. I just love it. I love it. It makes my heart sing. Although Let It Be did come out after this, this is truly the Beatles saying goodbye and leaving and cementing the legacy for the whole world. So there you have it. This was the list, so you can see where I was getting my info from. So #14, Please Please Me. #13, Beatles for Sale. #12, With the Beatles. #11, Help. #10, Rubber Soul. #9, A Hard Day's Night. #8, the Hey Jude album. #7, Yellow Submarine. #6, Revolver. #5, The White Album. #4, Let It Be. #3, Magical Mystery Tour. #2, Sgt. Pepper's. And of course, #1 was Abbey Road. Final thoughts before we close. I didn't include the famous Beatles collections albums, like the Red album and the Blue album. Again, it's a collection. I love both albums. It's sort of a greatest hits. That's why I didn't include it. I didn't include the Beatles live albums or their interview albums. I really did want to cover their studio albums. Now, I know there are Beatle fans out there probably flipping out on my personal choices. I would love for you guys to comment. Give me your list. Tell me what you thought was their worst albums up to their best albums, or if you wanted to go best to worst, that's fine. I would love to see what you guys think. Keep in mind, this is just my own personal view, and it could change. I mean, you could ask me on a different day, and maybe I would put Let It Be as my #1 album because I love it so much. Please like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. I'll be back with more best and worst lists. Also, I will be covering individual albums, and other than the Beatles, my other favorite music groups. Thank you very much for watching. Have a great day. I love you all. Take care.